Hello YouTube, I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney. On this channel, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users, getting folks the answers they need from an employment attorney. Apparently, over the next 72 hours, I'm getting somewhere between 6 inches and 3 feet of snow. That's wild, because it's April. It's also wild because I got about 2 feet of snow about a week and a half ago. I do love snow, but it's going to be weird because we're going to have like 3 feet of snow on the ground when the eclipse hits. I don't know why I think that's weird. It just seems weird. But I guess it's probably pretty irrelevant in terms of the whole thing. We got a question here today from YouTube user Tech5280. Tech5280 asks us, Vince, can you explain temporal proximity and how useful it can be during the EEOC process and through federal court? Is temporal proximity alone enough to show causation in a retaliation case and avoid summary judgment for the employer? And avoid summary judgment for the employer. Oh, for the employer's benefit. Got it. Okay. So, Tech5280, let's give a quick introduction on temporal proximity and then get into some of the finer points. All of this is going to be using layperson terms. None of this is going to be a good law school definition of the theory of temporal proximity for a variety of reasons, including you're not in law school and you're not going to be, presumably. And if you're a law student watching this video, have you considered becoming an employment attorney? We need more. And it is a great way to turn your time into money. All you gotta do is help people and you get paid a big chunk of what you win for them. It's tremendous, but I digress. Become an employment attorney. So you're not in law school, so I'm just gonna get real simple with this. And, listen, these are more, rather than a true definition of the term, I'm providing you a casual way to think about it in a simplified wording, I guess is the way to put it. So listen, temporal proximity is the idea that if two things are closer together in time, then there's a higher chance they might be causally related, right? The classic example in our field is if you engage in some protected activity, right? Let's say that you complain of sexual harassment or you ask for an accommodation, whatever it is, right? So let's say June 1st, 2024, you go into work and you complain of sexual harassment. You follow our video on how to complain of sexual harassment to HR, so you get it in writing before you go in and talk to HR. You do it through a third-party email server, the whole 9 yards. You do everything right. You followed our video to the T. My hat's off to you. Now, let's say you do that June 1st, 2024. If June 2nd of 2024, you are then terminated, there is a very strong argument that the temporal proximity of your complaint and your termination might show a causal connection between the two things. And that's very important for your case because when you complain of sexual harassment, you engage in protected activity. And there's a burden shifting. Now that you've engaged in protected activity, any negative workplace consequence that you suffer, the employer, well, there's a burden shifting. They're going to be assumed, potentially, to be guilty of retaliation. And retaliation opens up the third kind of damages. It opens up punitive damages, which can really be really important for your case. So a retaliation claim can be both lower risk because of the burden shifting and more valuable because of the highly speculative nature of punitive damages, right? Let's compare, though, that scenario that we just described where you go and complain on June 1st of 2024 and you're terminated on June 2nd of 2024. Instead, let's say that you go in and complain on June 1st of 2024, and then 4 years later, June 1st of, 2028, you're terminated. Well, our temporal proximity isn't quite so proximal anymore. Can we still say that we think you were targeted for your protected activity? We can. We can. Do we benefit as much from the arguments tied to temporal proximity as we would have otherwise? No. Now, temporal proximity, in terms of how the law is written, is not particularly damning. It's incredibly useful. It's incredibly useful. It is a tremendously valuable piece of evidence. But a lot of times, people want to present temporal proximity as a slam dunk. There are no slam dunks in employment law. Those do not exist. An attorney who uses the phrase slam dunk or sure thing with you is a bad attorney and should be beaten with some non-lethal weapon. Now, it's important to note that, though, that we specified in the eyes of a court, as the law is written, as the case law sees it. Because all of those things are being interpreted by human beings. And here's the thing. The human mind is obsessed with temporal proximity. That's just how we work, right? Listen, if you hear some sick rumor about somebody, you're a human being, so you think, that could be true. I think that's true. I don't love that person. That person's not someone I care deeply about. So I like to believe bad things about them. That same way your mind works, where you're predisposed to believe rumors about people, or at least believe they could be true. Yeah, that's also how the human mind works with temporal proximity. It's very similar to how people get causation confused, right? This thing happened, and then this thing happened, so they must be related. But it's not how that works. It could be. It's possible they're related, but you can't assume, right? But the human mind does, and that is what the human mind does with temporal proximity. The human mind says, well, you complained, and then bad things happened to you. I know what that means. I've been around the block once or thrice, and I'll tell you right now, if you complain of sexual harassment and then you get fired, you got fired because you complained of sexual harassment. And that is the true power of temporal proximity. The human mind loves it. The human mind believes in it. It makes sense to the human mind. It, as a narrative, appeals to the brains of every single human I've ever interacted with. Every single human that I've ever had to convince of anything related to any case found temporal proximity to be a compelling argument. So your question goes on. How useful can it be during the EEOC process and throughout federal court? Incredibly. Incredibly useful. Your question goes on. Is temporal proximity alone enough to show causation in a retaliation case and avoid summary judgment for the employer? So, in a summary judgment motion, where the employer is seeking summary judgment on a case, your job as the plaintiff is to show that questions of fact exist. Questions of fact that must then be determined by a finder of fact, which is either a judge, an arbitrator, or a jury, right? And you, through utilizing temporal proximity for your retaliation claim, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where that doesn't introduce a question of fact, where the jury could say, hey, I think that because things happen so closely together, the protected activity or the disclosure of the protected class, whatever it is, and the negative workplace consequence are so close in time together, I think there's a question of fact. I think a finder of fact could determine that they're related. Now, listen, can we develop, if we really sit here and rack our brain, could we develop a hypothetical where we can come to the conclusion that temporal proximity was probably not the reason you were terminated? Sure. I'll take a crack at it right now. You go in June 1st of 2024 and you complain of sexual harassment. June 2nd of 2024, you roll into work with a sack of grenades. And your boss says, listen, I don't want to fire you. What are you doing with those grenades? You got to get out of here. You say, no, I'm not going to listen to you, boss. I brought these grenades because we're going to right some wrongs. And I'm going to use them in the workplace. And the employer says, no, please stop. We love you. We don't want to fire you or call the police on you. Please, please stop. And you say, no, I won't stop. And then everyone jumps you and wrestles you to the ground and takes away your grenades. Now, I'm not trying to make light of violence in the workplace, so let's call these grenades like paint grenades or something like that, right? Let's step away from that. It's pretty clear from that scenario that you weren't fired because you complained, right? It's pretty clear you engaged in protected activity June 1st, and you went in June 2nd, and you did some wild shit. You got dumb. Like, super dumb. In fact, you got so dumb that nobody's even going to take your case at this point. It happens. People with legitimate cases get the stupids, and they do horrible things, and nobody will help them then. Because how are you going to rehabilitate that case, right? That's going to be horrific. That's going to be one hell of an uphill slog. Countless attorney hours, countless resources trying to rehab somebody who did some weird, wild stuff with paint grenades, right? Like, that's not funny. That's not cool. That's not how we right wrongs in this country. So, yeah, listen, temporal proximity is something you can defeat. Of course, it's not enough to be unassailable. But if you're looking to beat summary judgment and introduce a legitimate question of fact that needs a trial to take place, well, let me tell you, I think I would rate temporal proximity up there with inappropriate screenshot or like a threat in writing tied to like a quid pro quo or something like that. Like, it's really good evidence. It is like a keystone piece of evidence to build your case upon. It is always going to be a highlight of a case. Just that simple. It's always going to be a highlight of a case. It's going to give your case legs. It's going to increase your leverage exponentially. Right? There are cases, sincerely, that I look at the case and I'm like, oh man, I don't really know about this discrimination case. Like, it could be. It could also just be this person's kind of a jerk. Then the person engages in protected activity and they get fired. And it's close temporal proximity. Well, listen. This person may or may not be a jerk, but I have no doubt, thanks to the temporal proximity, that there was a relation between the termination and the protected activity. So we got ourselves a retaliation claim that is lower risk and higher value than a normal claim. And I have no question that this person had a good faith belief that they were experiencing discrimination. Were they? I don't know. They're kind of a jerk. But they believed they were. And then I know for a fact they experienced retaliation because I saw that temporal proximity, and my brain is human too, so my brain says, well, that must be retaliation. And I also know in my heart of hearts that I have a really easy time convincing a jury, maybe even a judge or an arbitrator, of that retaliation because of the temporal proximity. So, yeah, it's deeply compelling. It is fantastic evidence. You may be sitting pretty if that's something you're trying to use to beat a summary judgment motion. I wish you great luck, Tech5280. I wish you success. If this video was helpful, like, subscribe, comment down below. Share our channel so it can grow. Take care.